The Galactic Council chamber shimmered with pale blue light as the delegates gathered, their voices weaving into a tapestry of irritation, arrogance, and fear. Every species present understood the stakes of the Dra'kul expansion, yet the topic dominating the discussion was not the enemy's advance. It was humanity. A towering Vorthan diplomat slammed a clawed fist against his podium, declaring that humans had refused to send military champions to the frontier. Others hissed or clicked in agreement. To them, the absence was not strategy, it was cowardice. The accusations spread quickly, gathering momentum like debris in a gravity current. What the council failed to see was the difference between silence and fear. Humanity had made no public statement, issued no excuses, filed no requests for delay. It had simply listened, observed, and withdrawn from the discourse. For races accustomed to boasting about military strength, the quiet felt insulting. The murmurs rising through the assembly showed how deeply the slight stung. Amid the uproar, an aging Archivian representative attempted to calm the room, reminding the delegates that humanity's young technological status did not inherently imply weakness. But the sentiment drowned quickly beneath waves of derision. Species with centuries of spacefaring superiority dismissed Earth as a backwater world of flesh and sentimentality. They had seen no evidence of human champions demonstrating impossible feats, no displays of power to match the galaxy's elite warriors. Instead, they believed humanity survived by hiding behind treaties and diplomacy. The Council's demand had been simple. Each civilization must send its finest defenders to confront the Dra'kul before the swarms reach the inner systems. Yet when the registry listed humanity's contribution as classified, assumptions calcified. The Vorthan diplomat proclaimed humans unfit for membership in the war effort, and several delegates applauded. The chamber echoed with contempt. Far from the Council's luminous towers, on an unmarked orbital station orbiting a dim red star, humanity's true response unfolded in silence. A dim corridor hummed with the low vibration of engines warming for departure. Two figures stood side by side, waiting for clearance, saying nothing. They did not need to speak. Their preparations had been completed long before the council convened. The first figure, codenamed Vanta, adjusted the seals of his matte black exosuit, its surface absorbing light like a void-given form. Every movement he made was deliberate, economical, practiced. Beneath the armor, his expression remained calm. He had been crafted for the shadows, trained to move where no censor dared to look. To him, the council's accusations were irrelevant. Words changed nothing. Actions carried weight. Beside him stood Nox, taller, heavier, his armor shaped with angular plates that evoked the skeletal silhouette feared across Earth's underworld. The faceplate of his helmet displayed a stylized skull motif, not for intimidation, but for identity. He had long since ceased relying on fear as a weapon. He existed for finality, for clean endings, for threats erased without theatrics. His breathing was steady, modulated by his suit. His pulse did not rise. A technician approached with a data slate, her voice cautious as she reported that their drop coordinates had been confirmed. The Dra'kul staging moon was already mobilizing. She hesitated, sensing the enormity of the mission she was sending them into, but neither operative sought reassurance. Instead, Vanta simply nodded, and Nox rested a gloved hand on the grip of his hybrid weapon, gauging its balance in the low gravity. News of the Council's public condemnation reached the station moments before departure. A projection displayed the headline: Humans declared cowards by unanimous decree. Vanta stared at it for a single heartbeat, then dismissed the hologram. Nox didn't bother to look. Their dropships detached from the station with barely a whisper, gliding into the dark where words held no meaning. The Council believed humanity had abandoned the galaxy in its moment of need, unaware that two shadows were already descending toward the heart of the conflict. And as the stars stretched into thin white lines, the operatives remained silent, not from fear, but from purpose. The dropships pierced the Dra'kul moon's atmosphere without lights, heat signatures, or navigational broadcasts, slipping through the murk like predators born of the void. Vanta felt the familiar pull of controlled descent, his body adapting instantly to the shifting gravitational pockets. The moon's air tasted metallic, heavy with spores drifting from the fungal canyons below. He welcomed the discomfort. It clarified his mind, sharpening instincts that technology only enhanced. Beside him, Nox remained immovable, braced against the shaking hull as though turbulence were an abstract concept, not a physical force battering the craft. His visor displayed no emotion, only the silent skull that had become synonymous with terminal outcomes. When the dropships settled within a glade of twisted trees, the silence felt absolute. Vanta stepped out first, letting the shadows embrace him. His suit modulated his outline, bending moonlight around his form until his edges dissolved. Every footfall was ghostlike. He surveyed the forest with eyes trained to separate natural shapes from enemy camouflage. The Dra'kul had seeded scouts throughout this region, but none had detected the landing. That failure was deliberate. Humanity had mastered the art of not being seen. Nox descended more slowly, the ground compressing beneath his weight as he triggered the weapon systems integrated into his armor. A soft, pulsing hum resonated from the scythe rifle he carried, its curved blade gleaming faintly beneath moss-dimmed light. Though Vanta moved like a wisp of smoke, Nox advanced with a measured certainty of inevitability. Their contrast created a rhythm. One concealed danger, the other embodied it. Despite their differences, they shared an unwavering dedication to the mission. The Dra'kul outpost they sought lay less than a kilometer ahead, built into a ridge of bone-white stone that rose like a jagged spine across the landscape. Sensors embedded in the cliffs surveyed the terrain with a predatory sweep. Vanta crouched and studied their timing. He lifted a hand, signaling Nox to hold. With a controlled breath, he moved through the blind spots, shifting his trajectory each time the beams passed. The motions required absolute precision. A fraction too slow, and detection would trigger the swarm. Vanta's heartbeat remained steady, each step rehearsed in simulations harsher than reality. Nox waited until Vanta reached the ridge, then initiated his own advance. Rather than weaving through the sensor pattern, he activated a short-duration dampening field, absorbing the pulses instead of evading them. His approach was not subtle, but it was controlled, calibrated, so the system registered nothing abnormal. Where Vanta manipulated perception, Nox manipulated thresholds. They reached the cliffside almost simultaneously. A Dra'kul sentinel perched above them, its carapace glistening, mandibles twitching as it sampled the air. Vanta scaled the stone before it completed its sweep, claws extending from his gloves. He reached the creature, silenced it with a clean, swift incision, and anchored the corpse to an outcropping to prevent noise. When he glanced down, Nox was already ascending with mechanical grips embedded in his gauntlets, his method slower but unwavering. Inside the ridge, phosphorescent tunnels branched in every direction. The air vibrated with the rhythmic clicking of Dra'kul workers conduiting energy toward the fleet. Vanta motioned right. Nox shifted left. Their divergence was temporary, intended to compress the outpost from both flanks. Vanta slipped along a narrow pathway, disabling nodes that powered the communication relays. With each relay severed, the Dra'kul grew briefly confused, breaking formation before regaining discipline. Nox confronted a cluster of armored fighters, their compound eyes reflecting the glow of his visor. They charged in synchronized formation. He fired once, the blast reverberating through the cavern, collapsing several fighters instantly. Others faltered, unnerved by the unnatural precision of his strike. He advanced through them without hesitation, his movements deliberate and unyielding. When the final node collapsed beneath Vanta's blade, the entire outpost dimmed, lights flickering into darkness. The Dra'kul scrambled in confusion, severed from their command network. Vanta regrouped with Nox in the central chamber, where the last operational display revealed a startling truth. The Dra'kul were amassing not for a border assault, but for a direct strike on the Galactic Council itself. Vanta exhaled slowly. They never understood why we came. Nox holstered his weapon, the skull visor reflecting the dying lights. They'll understand soon enough. Their path forward had become clear and far deadlier. The Dra'kul flagship loomed in orbit like a colossal, organic cathedral, its hull pulsing with bioluminescent veins that mapped the creature ship's living interior. Vanta studied the structure from the stolen transport they had intercepted on the moon. The vessel's grotesque contours moved subtly, as though breathing, and even from a distance he sensed the malice woven into its design. Nox powered down the transport systems until they drifted as lifeless debris. The flagship's external nodes reached out with tendrils of energy, scanning for mechanical signatures. Vanta had already overridden the transport's core to mimic Dra'kul pheromone signals instead. The ruse held. The ship ingested them. The hangar swallowed the transport in a wet, resonant sigh. As the doors sealed behind them, the interior reshaped, forming tendrils that attempted to interface with the craft. Vanta sliced them before they made contact. Nox stepped out first, his boots sinking slightly into the fibrous floor. The texture resembled cartilage, each step sending subtle ripples across a surface that reacted to movement like water. Vanta followed, scanning every shifting contour, his senses tuned to the faint hum of energy converging toward the ship's center. He felt as though he were walking inside a colossal beast aware of his presence, but unable to locate him. The corridor ahead sloped downward, illuminated by a dim, pulsating glow. Nox adjusted his grip on the scythe rifle, and Vanta could hear the weapon's internal gyros hum, harmonizing with his suit's tactical systems. The deeper they went, the more intense the vibrations became. The Dra'kul were channeling psychic currents across the ship, weaving orders through a collective mind that stretched across the fleet. Vanta recognized this pattern from intercepted data. The Dra'kul leader resided at the heart of the ship, coordinating every unit. If they severed that mind, the fleet would collapse. A pair of sentries emerged from the wall itself, their limbs unfolding like blades of chitin. Vanta vanished in a ripple, leaving only disturbed air behind. Nox stood still, waiting. The sentries charged him, their screeches reverberating through the corridor. But before the first could strike, Vanta materialized behind it, slicing its neural stem. The second leapt at Nox. He intercepted it with a single upward strike, the blade cleaving through armor like wet parchment. The body dropped, twitching. They moved on. As they descended deeper, the corridors widened into chambers filled with Dra'kul workers tethered to conduits that fed psychic energy through the ship's core. Their mandibles clicked in unison, but none reacted to the intruders. They were entranced, functioning as batteries rather than soldiers. Vanta moved silently between them, studying their rhythmic motions, and found the pattern disturbing. The Dra'kul were preparing something enormous, something beyond a mere assault. Nox noticed it too, though his focus remained on assessing structural weak points. At the end of the chamber, a membrane-covered arch pulsed with red light. Vanta pressed his palm against it. The membrane recoiled, then dissolved into mist, revealing a long descent lit by streaks of ultraviolet luminescence. The air thickened as they entered the core's threshold, accompanied by a low, resonant voice vibrating through the organic walls. The Dra'kul leader was aware. When they reached the central chamber, a towering figure rose from a throne of fused bone and muscle. Eyes like molten silver glared at them, and its voice echoed simultaneously in sound and thought. It mocked their fragile bodies, calling them an aberration of evolution. Vanta felt its psychic pressure like claws raking across his consciousness, testing for weakness. Nox resisted with brute willpower, stabilizing his mental defenses through neural dampeners integrated into his suit. They stood firm. The leader extended a limb toward a massive bioreactor fused to its spine. Energy crackled around it, the room trembling. The Dra'kul intended to unleash a psychic shockwave capable of crippling the entire Galactic Council in one devastating stroke. Vanta moved first, darting across the chamber with inhuman speed, slicing through the conduits feeding the reactor. The leader roared, its voice fracturing the air. Nox followed, firing a blast that destabilized the chamber's lattice. The creature lunged, but Nox met it head-on, locking its strike long enough for Vanta to deliver a decisive cut across the core stabilizer. The reactor spiraled into overload, flooding the chamber with violent pulses of collapsing energy. They had seconds. Vanta signaled retreat, and Nox kicked the Dra'kul leader aside before sprinting after him. The corridors convulsed, walls melting as the ship's mind disintegrated. Reaching the hangar, they launched into transport just as the flagship erupted into a cascade of implosions that rippled across the Dra'kul fleet. Ships faltered, crashed, or drifted powerless. As the shock wave faded, Vanta exhaled, steadiness returning to his breath. Nox watched the dying fleet in silence, the skull visor reflecting the drifting remains. Their work was not finished, but the galaxy had just unknowingly been pulled back from annihilation. Debris from the Dra'kul fleet drifted through the void like scorched petals scattered across a black sea. Vanta guided the stolen transport on a silent trajectory toward neutral space, its systems barely holding after the violent escape. The vessel shuddered as the last shockwaves dissipated, and he adjusted power flow to keep their engines from collapsing under strain. Nox watched the remnants of the fleet without triumph, only contemplation. Victory, to him, was not a sensation but an outcome, one step in a sequence that had not yet completed. The galaxy believed humanity weak. The truth now drifted in the vacuum behind them, proving otherwise. A transmission interrupted the quiet. The Galactic Council broadcast emergency updates, their voices frantic as scout vessels reported the sudden disappearance of Dra'kul coordination. Dozens of species scrambled to understand the collapse. None possessed data that explained the simultaneous implosion of the enemy's chain of command. Only humanity had the answer, and neither operative felt compelled to announce it. The Council's confusion was simply the natural consequence of their assumptions. Their transport neared the Council's central station, a massive citadel orbiting a blue-white star. Defense arrays scanned the vessel, hesitating when they registered human biological signatures aboard a Dra'kul craft. Vanta transmitted a coded clearance that bypassed several security layers, and the station reluctantly granted docking access. As the craft settled into a maintenance bay, a contingent of armed guards waited with weapons lowered but ready. Their expressions ranged from suspicion to outright fear. Humanity's classified operatives were rarely seen, and when they appeared, circumstances were never ordinary. Vanta exited first, his movements measured and non-threatening, though nothing in his posture allowed vulnerability. Nox followed, towering behind him, the skull-like visor drawing involuntary steps backward from several guards. Neither operative acknowledged the reaction. Their purpose did not require approval. A council escort led them through a series of corridors toward the assembly chamber. The silence along the way was dense with unease. Inside the chamber, delegates crowded around holographic projections of the destroyed Dra'kul fleet. Panic and disbelief rippled through their arguments. When the doors opened and Vanta and Nox entered, the room fell abruptly still. The projections continued to flicker, but the delegates' voices died as every gaze shifted toward the two humans who crossed the floor with quiet certainty. The Vorthan diplomat who had previously declared humanity cowardly stared at them with widened pupils, his ridged crest trembling. He attempted to speak, but managed only a rasp. Another delegate stepped forward, demanding an explanation for the Dra'kul collapse, insisting it was impossible for a fleet to break without internal sabotage. Vanta, calm as ever, offered a data slate containing encrypted footage, the infiltration, the disabled nodes, the confrontation in the core. The council watched the recording with a mixture of dread and awe. When the final frame faded, Nox spoke, his voice resonant through his modulated helm. He stated simply that humanity had sent what was required. No more, no less. He explained that their species did not measure strength by spectacle, but by results. The council had mistaken restraint for cowardice, silence for surrender. Vanta added that threats were met with precision, not posturing, and that humanity preferred efficiency over recognition. Their words were not rebukes. They were clarifications delivered without venom. The chamber remained in stunned quiet until several delegates bowed their heads in acknowledgement. Others, still shaken, questioned whether humans possessed more of these operatives. Vanta offered no answer. Nox's unreadable visor prevented them from gleaning any hint. The uncertainty unsettled many, but it also commanded respect. For the first time, the Council understood that humanity's power was not diminished by its youth among the stars. When the Assembly proposed granting Earth a seat among the major galactic powers, Vanta declined. Humanity would cooperate, he said, but would not seek authority born from fear. The mission had been to stop annihilation, not to reshape political hierarchies. With their statement delivered, the operatives turned to leave. As they exited, whispers followed them, soft, reverent, tinged with apprehension. One voice rose above the others, not loud enough to challenge, but loud enough to linger. If two could accomplish such devastation, what would an entire human force achieve? Vanta and Nox walked into the corridor without answering. Their steps were silent, but the echo of what they had done, what they represented, resounded across the galaxy.